Being natural is simply a pose, and the most irritating pose I know.
cried Lord Henry, laughing, and the two young men went out into the garden together, and ensconced themselves on a long bamboo seat that stood in the shade of a tall laurel bush. The sunlight slipped over the polished leaves. In the grass white daisies were tremulous. After a pause, Lord Henry pulled out his watch.
"I'm afraid I must be going, Basil,"
he murmured.
"And before I go, I insist on your answering a question I put to you some time ago."
"What is that?"
said the painter, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground.
"You know quite well."
"I do not, Harry."
"Well, I will tell you what it is. I want you to explain to me why you won't exhibit Dorian Gray's picture. I want the real reason."
"I told you the reason."
"No, you did not. You said it was because there was too much of yourself in it. Now that is childish."
"Harry,"
said Basil Hallward, looking him straight in the face,
"every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who, on colored canvas, reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture is that I am afraid that I have shown in it the secret of my own soul."
Lord Henry laughed.
"And what is that?"
he asked.
"I will tell you,"
said Hallward, but an expression of perplexity came over his face.
"I'm all expectation, Basil,"
continued his companion, glancing at him.
"Oh, there is really very little to tell, Harry,"
answered the painter.
"and I am afraid you will hardly understand it. Perhaps you will hardly believe it."
Lord Henry smiled, and, leaning down, plucked a pink-petalled daisy from the grass and examined it.
"I'm quite sure I shall understand it."
Blue thread, a long, thin dragon-fly floated past on its brown gauze wings. Lord Henry felt as if he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating, and wondered what was coming.
"The story is simply this,"
said the painter after some time.
2 months ago I went to a crush at Lady Brandon's. You know we poor artists have to show ourselves in society from time to time, just to remind the public that we are not savages. With an evening coat, well, after I'd been in the room about 10 minutes, talking to overdressed dowagers and tedious academicians, I suddenly became conscious that someone was looking at me. I turned halfway around and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I did not want any external influence in my life. You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I've always been my own master, or had at least always been so, till I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you, something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do so. It was sort of a cowardice. I take no credit to myself for trying to escape.
"Conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil. Conscience is the trade name of the firm, that is all."
"I don't believe that, Harry, and I don't believe you do either. However, whatever was my motive, and it may have been pride, for I used to be very proud, I certainly struggled to the door. There, of course, I stumbled against Lady Brandon. You are not going to run away so soon, Mr. Hallward," she screamed out. You know her curiously shrill voice.
"Yes, she is a peacock, in everything but beauty,"
said Lord Henry, pulling the daisy to bits with his long, nervous fingers.
I could not get rid of her. She brought me up to royalties and people with stars and garters and elderly ladies with gigantic tiaras and parrot noses. She spoke of me as her dearest friend. I had only met her once before, but she took it into her head to lionize me. I believe some picture of mine had made a great success at the time. at least had been chattered about in the penny newspapers, which is the 19th century standard of immortality. Suddenly I found myself face to face with the young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met again. It was reckless of me, but I asked Lady Brandon to introduce me to him. Perhaps it was not so reckless after all. It was simply inevitable. We would have spoken to each other without any introduction. I am sure of that. Dorian told me so afterwards. He too felt we were destined to know each other.
Tragic whisper, which must have been perfectly— My dear fellow, she tried to found a salon and only succeeded in opening a restaurant. How could I admire her? But tell me, what did she say about Mr. Dorian Gray?
Oh, something like, "Charming boy, poor dear mother and I absolutely inseparable. Quite forget what he does, afraid he doesn't do anything. Oh, yes, plays the piano, or is it the violin, dear Mr. Gray?" Neither of us could help laughing, and we became friends at once.
Laughter is not at all a bad beginning for a friendship, and it is far the best ending for one,
said the young lord, plucking another daisy. Hallward shook his head.
"You don't understand what friendship is, Harry,"
he murmured.
"Or what enmity is, for that matter. You like everyone, that is to say, you are indifferent to everyone."
How horribly unjust of you,
cried Lord Henry, tilting his hat back and looking up at the little clouds that, like ravelled skeins of glossy white silk, were drifting across the hollowed turquoise of the summer sky.
Yes, horribly unjust of you. I make a great difference between people. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They are all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? Oh, I think it is rather vain.
"I should think it was, Harry, but according to your category I must merely be an acquaintance."
My dear old Basil, you are much more than an acquaintance.
"And much less than a friend. A sort of brother, I suppose?"
Oh, brothers! I don't care for brothers. My elder brother won't die, and my younger brothers seem never to do anything else.
"Harry!"
exclaimed Hallward, frowning.
My dear fellow, I'm not quite serious, but I can't help detesting my relations. I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ourselves. I quite sympathize with the rage of the English democracy against what they call the vices of the upper orders. How extraordinary! I thought you would never care for anything but your art.
"He is all my art to me now,"
said the painter gravely.
"I sometimes think, Harry, that there are only two eras of any importance in the world's history. The first is the appearance of a new medium for art, and the second is the appearance of a new personality for art also. What the invention of oil painting was to the Venetians, the face of Antonius was to the late Greek sculpture, and the face of Dorian Gray will some day be to me. It is not merely that I paint from him, draw from him, sketch from him. Of course I have done all that, but he is much more to me than a model, or a sitter. I won't tell you that I am dissatisfied with what I have done of him, or that his beauty is such that art cannot express it. There is nothing that art cannot express, and I know that the work I have done since I met Dorian Gray is good work, is the best work of my life. But in some curious way, I wonder will you understand me, his personality has suggested to me an entirely new manner in art, an entirely new mode of style.
Side of love. It's the faithless who know its tragedies. Ah, I've just remembered.
What?
The name. My Aunt Lady Agatha told me that she discovered some wonderful young creature who was going to help her in the East End. She never said anything about his being good-looking.
Harry, I don't want you to meet him.
What nonsense you do talk.
Dorian.
I beg your pardon, Basil. I didn't know you had anyone with you.
This is Lord Henry Wotton.
I've just been hearing from Basil what a fine sitter you are. You're also one of my aunt's favourite victims, I'm afraid.
I am in Lady Agatha's black books at present. I promised to go to a club with her in Whitechapel last Tuesday. Do you know, I really forgot all about it.
You look genuinely contrite about it. Oh, I will make your peace with my aunt. She's quite devoted to you. And I don't think it really matters about your not being there. You're too serious to go in for philanthropy, Mr. Gray. And profound.
Come inside, Dorian. And Harry, do go off to one of your do's or something.
It seems I'm unwanted.
Don't go. Basil is only in one of his starting order sulks, and besides, I'd like to know why you think I shouldn't go in for philanthropy.
You don't really mind, Basil, do you? You've often told me you like your sitters to have someone to chat to.
Well, there isn't much left to do, and Dorian's whims are laws to everyone except himself. So just sit, Harry. And Dorian, on with the coach. Onto the platform. And try not to move about too much today. And don't take any notice of what he says. He's a very bad influence on all of his friends, except me.
Is your influence really as bad as that?
There's no such thing as a good influence. All influence is immoral.
Why?
Because to influence someone is to give him one's soul. That he no longer thinks his natural thoughts or burns with his natural passions. He's become the echo of someone else's music, the actor of a part that has not been written for him. To realize one's own nature as perfectly as one can. That's what we are for. People have forgotten the highest of all duties, the duty one owes to oneself.
Dorian, your head a little on one side.
I still believe that if a man could live out his life fully and completely,
Yes?
give form to every thought, expression to every idea, and so on, well, the world might forget its past maladies. We are punished for our refusals. The body sins once and is done with it. It's in the brain and the brain alone that the great sins of the world take place. You must know that, Mr. Gray. I've had passions that made you afraid, thoughts that filled you with terror, daydreams and sleeping dreams.
Please stop. There's some answer to all you're saying, I know, but I can't find it for the moment. I'd like to think. Or not to. Basil, I'm getting weary standing up here.
Just a little longer.
It's so stifling in here.
I'm sorry. I tend to forget about these things when I'm working. That was better than ever. Stillness. I don't know what Harry's been saying to you, but you certainly
Weren't being paid compliments, if that's what you mean.
Whatever it was, don't believe a word he says.
He's right. You are indeed a wonderful creation. You know more than you think you know, just as you know less than you want to know. You have the most marvelous youth. And that is the one thing worth having.
Well, I don't feel that way, Lord Henry.
Don't frown so, Mr. Gray. Beauty is a form of genius, higher, in fact. It requires no explaining. It's one of the great facts of the world. Like sunlight on water or the darkness of seasons. It makes princes of those who have it. You smile. Ah, when you've lost it, it will be no time to smile. The mystery of the world is in the visible, not the invisible. Yes, Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you for the present. But don't squander the gold of your days. The moment I saw you, I knew that you were unconscious of what you might be. I felt I must tell you. Beauty fades, limbs fail, senses rot. Youth is absolutely nothing else in the world.
Dorian, I'm waiting.
You are glad that you have met me, Mr. Gray?
Glad now. I wonder if I shall always be.
Always. What a dreadful word it is. Women are so fond of using it. They spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever. It's also a meaningless word. The only difference between a caprice and a lifelong passion is that the caprice lasts slightly longer.
In that case, perhaps our friendship should be a caprice.
It's done. No more, as I thought. It's quite done, just now.
My dear fellow, you must be over the moon. It's the most brilliant modern portrait I've ever seen. It really is. Mr. Gray, come over and look at yourself.
Is it really finished?
It's quite finished. Yeah, I didn't think we'd do anything today. Oh, darling, I can't tell you how grateful I am. It's as if it's done itself.
That's entirely due to me, isn't it?
Dorian, what is it? Don't you like it?
But of course he likes it. Who wouldn't? I'll give anything you like to ask for it, Basil. I must have it.
It's not my property, Harry.
Then whose property is it?
Dorian's, of course.
He's a very lucky fellow.
This picture will always remain young. It will never be older than this particular day in June. If only it could grow old instead of me. I would give my soul for that.
You'd hardly care for such an arrangement, would you, Basil? Rather hard lines on your work.
I should have checked very strongly.
I'm sure you would, Basil. You like your art better than your friends. I'm no more to you than one of your green bronze figures. Not as much, I should think.
Dorian, don't say things like that.
No, your picture has taught me. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. When I do find I am growing old, I shall simply kill myself.
Dorian, listen, I've never had such a friend as you. You tell me that you could be jealous of material things in such a way? You're finer than anyone.
Yes, I'm jealous of that portrait. Why should it keep what I lose? Every moment it takes something from me. Why did you paint it? So that one day I shall be mocked by it?
Harry, this is your doing.
It is the real Dorian Gray, that's all.
It is not!
But then if it is not, what has it to do with me?
No, I can't quarrel with my two best friends at once. You know, between you, you've made me hate the finest piece of work I've ever done. Well, it's only colour and canvas. I won't let it cut across our lives. I'll destroy it.
Don't, Basil, don't! It would be murder.
You appreciate my work? I was beginning to doubt it.
Appreciate it? It's part of myself. I feel it.
Well, when you're dry, you shall be varnished, framed, and sent home.
I wish you two wouldn't squabble over that picture. You'd much better let me have it, Basil. That silly boy doesn't really want it, and I really do.
If you let anyone but me have it, Basil, I'll never forgive you.
It's yours, you know that. I gave it you before it existed.
Why don't we go to the theatre tonight? There's sure to be something on somewhere. You too, Basil, won't you?
I can't. I've got too much work to do. Besides, I hate dressing up.
Then you and I shall go alone, Mr. Gray.
I shall stay with the real Dorian.
Is it the real Dorian? Am I really like that?
Yes. Just like that.